And to introduce this topic, which has this word genes, which we revisited last time, but maybe for Jules and probably useful for potential audiences, anybody watches these YouTube videos, it's good to slightly summarize the gene idea um, uh, in this early part. So the gene is a wordplay on meme. The G standing for gamified, gameable, game-like. Doesn't really matter. Like intentionally, it's not gamification because not to start the kind of worms of what the problems with that concept is, but but intentionally it wants to kind of put this like meme but game like thought at the forefront, and that's kind of the maybe the key idea in there is like that in all its, let's say, richness and hacking culture of memes, there is a kind of a heart in the middle of it, which is surprisingly traditional. And that heart being that when somebody faces a meme, they are essentially a spectator. That the meme itself is something to look at and then like or not like. Of course, you can make a new meme. That's like more encouraged, or well, like I would say it's encouraged in arts as well. But then that new meme enters the same loop that others look at it. And then the gene idea was this, that's precisely the relation that the gene should change, that rather than being a ready-made product, it's more ingredients. But what is something that like tries to inherit everything that is in meme culture in terms of sharing, like loose expression, etc., and this sort of network-like nature, but then changes the heart to be that every a gene is kind of a micro game, and this that's maybe a short enough summary. There's a lot in there, but like just to give this sort of basic idea in itself. And this came from last time when I was when we were looking at an oxel called gene. Like maybe we'll leave what is an oxel in this context, and why, because that relation is important and interesting, but it's maybe too much to introduce and takes too long. But rather maybe we'll look at the screen itself, or the document slash screen. Now here, in a kind of intentionally very drafty format, it's not any kind of a finalized gem, etc., but it's more about the kind of playability of it. We have one image, and then we have this sort of different definitions, descriptions, but in the atmosphere of playability, and we can visit that first. So, because some of the themes I wanted to bring to this example gene are not maybe yet expressed there, but I thought it's better to maybe have them in the conversation, and because we can change them as well. So imagine this. Like you're seeing, say, this image, say this text, maybe they're placed differently. It doesn't really matter. There's no right way to do it. But what it's giving you, which could be the one, for example, with the exclamation point at the end, is generate a painting. I was thinking of writing more to it, but we can decide this, like in a way, like the painting could be generated by somebody saying one detail about it, and then somebody else saying another detail about it, essentially turning it to moves. But then for it, we have this, let's say, to go back to this, imagine this. Imagine a place, world, realm, setting, and doesn't have to be fictional, maybe our world altered, or where painting means something different. And then the differences, the alterations come here. So it has a surface which is traditionally layered. And underneath there is a flesh layer, flesh being in quotation marks, or secreted. And towards this, like in the image, there is some, let's call it inspiration, that the surface of the face has a hole in it with another layer underneath it, which is now generative material potentially for that. The canvas is dual, living and dead, which I don't know what it exactly means. I'm just putting that in there. Maybe it generates something for the play, maybe it doesn't. It doesn't have to, but it might be interesting to think like, okay, it has layers, and one of the surfaces is considered living and one is considered dead. How does it alter our sense of making paintings? And then there is an idea of that maybe it's people imagine, or maybe there are real spirits that float about paintings. It's a different world, so to speak, so we can imagine that. And they might have an add-on of sacred, which is like if you see there is a small caterpillar here and it has a holy halo, as does this cricket on other side of the figure. Once again, what does that mean? We can figure out. Then there is an anchor. I pointed out here this with this sort of simple circles. So what does it mean that painting has an anchor that is source of mana or considered like a source of magic? Same thing applies. We don't know what that means. That's up to play. And then a question form, which is like jewelry for paintings. There's another question to jewelry itself, like what does it mean that paintings could have jewelry of their own? Like, do people conventionally add jewelry to paintings? Is it a way of appreciation? All of that is up to play. And then there's this generate a painting. That's a very rough introduction of the ingredients. Like what you get here generally is not something ready, but something that is generated. So in this sense, like pointing towards play. I have some other thoughts. Maybe one more thing I could say is that this could be played, of course, like completely in a way in a fictional bubble. Like let's imagine a world where there is such a sense of painting, but it can also be used to entertain. How could it change our sense of painting or sense of culture in general? And we can see what happens with that. And maybe finally, I intentionally kept the expressions rather simple, because then we can add to them or move them or change them. Like stylistic reasons, just slow things down for now. So any comments, questions on that introduction of playable gene direction?
I'd have a couple, but I think they would all be meta. So I don't know if we want to go there now or if we want to proceed.
I mean, maybe you can introduce them. If we think that they are too meta, then we can decide to go to other questions. But
yeah, oh, I like that. So I offer them as possible, possible questions. So the one is in good XORG tradition, to raise that point. I think the question of the materiality of this, because there's, I mean, again, is this material agnostic, or is it kind of materially premised in the way that that how access is structured, like how do we have access? How does anyone have access to the gene itself? So like that would mean like if we think of operating on the gene, so that posed as the relationship. So what's the relationship between the gene and the meme? Since also in the meme, that same question would pose itself: who has access? Which is, I think, where you're coming from with your critique of the meme, right? So it's it's diffused, and then the opportunity you have is to look at it. In this moment, you have the opportunity to play it, but do you have what's the agency? How is the agency structured around this one? That would be one point. The other one is basically almost kind of encapsulated in this, like the distribution part. And the last one I thought was that's maybe just an observation which I want to kind of temporalize by speaking it out loud, because I'm working on this on my thesis that I introduced some session ago. That like funny thing that like now occurs to me is that the game you you raise into the air right now, you say, Becco, that we can imagine a world in which painting works the way you just described, but by that we could also use that imagination to think about how we think about painting today, like presently, let's say, right? So you kind of use the game as a backdoor for fictioning, where you kind of first at least, well, maybe you do it, or maybe you also just pretend, who would be able to know the difference, that you aim at a game canvas, but basically you are all the same. At the same time, you have already kind of in the back of your eye that you really want to be talking about what painting could mean presently, consensually, conventionally. So or that I think is very, sorry?
Or give the freedom of jumping between those. And staying even in a fictional bubble if you want to, but also jumping out of it if you want to.
Yeah, and that I find there's a kind of the thing that this leads me to, which I've been really interested in, like that I find really interesting, that you can kind of basically pull out, like in the Yellow Submarine movie, where they have a hole in the pocket and they can pull out the hole and they can jump through that hole. That you can pull out a game to open up a possibility for fictioning that can have implications back to how we conceive of the real world via this kind of procedural rhetoric thing. And the connection in which I find this interesting is that I've been looking at how do powerful metaphorics come into the world. And one of the main cases that I've been thinking around has been this entanglement that's been proposed by Karen Barad, like inherited from Heisenberg, given onward to Donna Haraway, and it's become such a powerful, indeed, organizational metaphor, and more than a metaphor, like a kind of like possible paradigm in a way. But it could do that because it was somehow it has had this kind of quasi, or not even quasi, but it has had this kind of point of origin that has been thought of being anchored in the real world, because quote unquote actual particles are entangled, and so you have that thing, and then out of that you build this whole kind of new thought world, and that's become powerful. And I've been asking myself, in how far is the power that this idea of entanglement has now gained, and how far is that owed to the fact, to the kind of traditional fact that we are open to believing in its validity because we are given the information that it is based in some real world phenomenon. And now what you're saying here, Pekko, is you open a fictional world phenomenon by which you can bring a new idea about stuff that has real world implications. So does that have the potential to create a similar impact due to the fact that it can realize it in real world, as we're doing now, through a game? God, I hope you follow me.
Yes, yes. I think, like, to address the last point, which is huge, but I'll address it very shortly for the question of time and practice. Like, but yes, I think is the short answer. Then slightly longer answer is, well, what it can do in this, like, let's call them kind of bubbles or gardens, really. Let's call them gardens then rather than bubbles that you can create. Like, you can escape to the fiction to garden something, but it's a garden because it can grow out of it. And what does it mean by growing out of it? Like, let's say we play this, and then one of the ingredients creates like just a snippet, like a little glimpse for somebody from painting in like two surfaces that they intentionally crack, or everybody who comes to the painting removes the surface, and they don't know the other connotations that it creates. But then that can enter to the real world, and how it can enter is like a garden that it can grow, that maybe touches upon two people, or somebody makes a work and it touches upon people who see it. Like, you can't, like, there's no power really for anybody, for games or otherwise, to just decide something for the world and the world changes. But what you can do is, like, if you grow the idea out, it like starts to leave seeds and starts to create stems that grow into the world itself. And this is kind of clearly playing with that possibility and what could be done with that. And the fiction itself, or this sort of being able to develop it without caring for how the world has shackled things, is a way to create a nurturing space for this thing that might grow out of. Like, in a way, art creates those nurturing spaces, but often leaves the things in those spaces. And here it's kind of playing two sides. Is like, okay, nurturing spaces are useful, that these kind of things can grow and generate, but then how then they can grow out. Okay, that was the, well, final point on that theoretical topic. The metaphor, another big topic, but like, I would say that there is a very large expansion of how we think about the metaphor, in the sense of, if we think of metaphors not just in the semantic sphere of language, but in terms of behavior. And I'll make a concrete example. If I make a game where there is a rule of players should play like or should play in the atmosphere of springtime. Well, that's a rule, but it's a highly metaphorical. But if it's a game and then the players start moving in a spring-like manner, that's still metaphor, but now it's real behavior. So the behavior is metaphoric. And this is a doorway that is underutilized, which is actually constantly present in these kind of games, but hasn't really been highlighted. So there is this sort of sense of metaphor when it's made in a form of a rule, which is meant to create other behavior, takes the metaphor and extends it to behavior. So that doorway is interesting. Final point.
Is that though? Sorry. Is the behavior, or like the movement, let's say, of those performers, is that metaphorical though only when one knows that they're supposed to be springy? What if I don't know that they've been told that, and I observe their movement? Where's the metaphorical kind of part that I can access?
Well, now you're assuming that the spectator is important. Like, I mean, there could be, and right, like if it's a performance, but if it's a game, that's there's not necessarily any spectators. Like,
so it's metaphoric to themselves.
Yes, and metaphoric to the players. Like, let's say you create metaphoric social rules, and that makes the people behave differently. It might be important or not that the others know that there's metaphoric background rules behind them, But really, if you're in a game consideration, let's say what happens to the players is the major consideration. It's the dominant consideration. Like, and so yes, it could be there. Maybe it affects things that people know or don't know, but really like how we can change our behavior, and that includes metaphorics, is in itself like highly interesting. And not just for games, but social behavior in general, whether there are somebody spectating or not, because it changes the behavior itself and makes us do different things. Final point, which is a practical point, and going back to your first accessibility, the one thing I wanted to highlight is like the accessibility of editing, etc., is ultimately always a practical question. On principle, you could like to say that you want to make everything editable as possible, but then you always have to put it somewhere. Like in this case, it's in Jamboard, which is not as fancy as Miro, but both of them have their limitations because you have to ultimately put it somewhere. Like the editability, like on principle, you could think like you want to make it as open as possible, but on practice, you might not have the tools to follow that principle. And I think like here, the question is similar to memes with slightly more maybe expansion towards that. Is like some people want to make the memes open, but then the easiest way to post it somewhere is put it in a JPEG, which is not editable. But that's okay. Like people will find a way. You cannot always play by principle. But the final and maybe the most important practical point here is the playing is not just editing. Like if you look at this and you have this, and let's say there is this culture of gemes, which is like I'm not here to look at this and say, yay, it's cool or not cool. Doesn't matter because I'm not a spectator. I'm rather getting this as ingredients. It's a play piece. And how I'm suggested to play is to create this forms of different paintings, like unconventional, exotic forms of paintings. That can only come through play. This is only giving me ingredients, not giving the meal. It's giving me carrots and so on, and the carrots being like the ideas towards the canvas and whatever. So you can play this without moving anything concretely, and that's a key thing how it would be different. It's not just that gem has to be something that you concretely move things. Of course, it can be, but already this can be a gem if you approach it like I'm not just here spectating, but now I will play this gem, and therefore I created maybe together this form of painting. Now you're in playing land, so that's important.
I don't want to kind of milk this endlessly, but it's too interesting so that I don't at least give another word, if I may. I just one thing that came to my mind is like if Jamboard would be a kind of social medium compared to Twitter, then the playability would be in the platform. So you have suddenly you have like so. What was the other thing? I like very much this kind of distinction between, because I think that's a real distinction. Like if let's say if I put out a game, like I make a little game and I put it out through the channels in which, or the kind of context or biotopes in which memes live, then it might kind of have that same sense a bit to it that I see that, okay, I can play the game, that's fine. Then I scroll to the next, and then we're still in the kind of spectator situation. But if it is like you say, that it's a part of a game, so then you come, I think, closer to this kind of a metaversian thought more, and I'm not talking about Facebook, but more about like loot, where you have a thing that you can plug across a whole, any span of existence and use it as a particle. I think that's a very different notion.
It's it can be a part of a game, or it can be a game itself in the sense of play, like generating the new form of painting might be a goal itself. Like there's no winning, there's no result, but you can combine it with another gene. Let me, like, there is one more, but for example, I started this, like, which was simply this idea of carrier cities, that it's a city that a person carries on their shoulders. And of course, I could have more to it. But why I kind of underline it is like you could combine this and this painting and put them in the same game. Like you choose which pieces you take, but even one piece is a game in this sense of not the game having like a clear closure, but being a kind of an open thing of play. But yeah, hopefully, I mean, important points, but we could try to, I mean, whatever people want to comment, say theoretical or not theoretical. I also have like some moves to start the more play if nobody else is ready to start it, because I probably didn't describe it well enough. Any comments? Any questions also? Like,
I mean, it's all fairly clear to me. I like when you use the well, when I got a bit lost with Martin's question, but then I seem to have understood that it's of course between it's a bit the conundrum between the sort of imaginative space of the game, of playing, of finding playable structures within realities or sort of objects, or and then how to sort of transpose them to actual sort of more pragmatic aspects of life. And I really like the metaphor of the garden, because that to me makes lots of sense in relation to this. But I guess this is also part of what I've, been feeling like what the XORG sessions are to me, at least, like this very much sort of duel between going very abstract into games and then going back to sort of tangible life applications. So there is this duality all the time where we go really abstract into concepts and meanings. Because ultimately, I mean, what you're suggesting here to me is as well this generative aspect. So sort of like finding meanings within this game scene that you set on the Jamboard.
Yeah, maybe we could try practically in like we have been in useful theory land, but like, so there could be a simple way of playing. There could be many other ways, but just to put a simple one is like, let's put a move which is add phrase, which could be a sentence or whatever, like any length, writing something of such painting. And this is a super crude way of expressing it, but what I mean by this is, like, we could play essentially where anybody can take a turn. And turn, there's one move, which is like, I'll make an example move. I'll pick one of the elements. I don't have to pick any because it's not even in the rule, but for example's sake, I pick something. I pick the jewelry, and I'll just describe the scene, situation, like a slice of it, where there is this painting that has a lot of jewelry in front of it and some of it like hang to it. And we can see a person bringing a jewelry into the painting, and this is conventional in this realm. Notice that I didn't describe what the jewelry looks like. That's open, and what kind of a jewelry it is. merely this sort of like a slice of convention. Now, anybody else can make a move where, say, they continue that, branch off, describe the jewelry, or continue what happens to this painting, or describe other paintings in the space if there are, or make a completely different branch to talk about like the surfaces being layered or whatever. But all of these are kind of adding to this different sense of painting. So that was my first move, like this painting adorned with strangely installed jewelry. And we can see a person placing a jewel like very carefully on a hook that they have installed in front of the painting.
Well, I gave a segue to this because it's to me so obvious by seeing these insects. Well, if someone, as someone places the jewelry onto a hook in the painting, then there's also insects flying around, which sort of as well, they themselves, sort of approach the surface and rest on the painting, which probably by then is certainly sort of gains some sculptural elements from a 2D surface. So there's all this collection of insects gathering on the painting, and they actually sort of as well maybe damage the surface. So the halo that you see on it is actually a bit of possibly some damaging on the surface from the sort of liquid that the bug release on the surface.
That was a great move. I would have several moves on that, but I'll shut myself up so somebody else can do a move. But yeah, that opened a lot of interesting directions. Remember, you don't have to follow this pathway that we are forming. You can branch off new pathways, like if you have different ideas, or you can follow this one. And can be very hazy, like very impressionistic. Like I left the jewelry very open because I didn't yet have a good idea on it, so I just said jewelry. Like so, whatever like idea, however question form, you can even put it in a question form. That's fine. Martin, Jakub, you will have to form like this possibility of showing, so I'm pushing you, because otherwise I'll jump in. And of course, Jules, if you want to, you can, but to soften the entrance. I know the game is a bit of a challenge. It's kind of intentionally a bit of a challenge, but often these kind of challenges are important because they make you think differently.
I would just, so like I stay in the kind of what is what exploration and suggest that, so I don't have a mouse pointer, so I need to kind of guide you a little bit verbally around this, that what appears to be maybe a face and a hair of that person, or like what looks like a person's face and hairdo, and then there's on the left and on the right is these kind of arches or what that I can't exactly decipher what they are maybe aiming to represent, but I would suggest that that thing, that whole complex is flatter than a sheet of paper. Like I cannot say anything about what it transitions into when we look at what might be resembling a bit of a neck. That I don't know, but I know that the kind of apart, everything up from that kind of red circled thing to the left goes that insect underneath a triangle, to the right along the outside edge of that other arch, back to in the dark meeting point, what could be a neck. That's infinitesimally flat.
Infinitesimally flat?
Like as flat can be.
Just as an addition, and maybe kind of playing around with other possibility, like how these things can grow, I wrote like very short descriptions of the mine and Linda's moves, but I'm leaving that open for anybody to write to, mostly to play around with this. What is this growing? Like, it's not like this is the right way to do this, but just play around with that. Like, and that's open for others to write, because I probably won't write there all the time. I wanted to,
I can't, sorry, just a side comment. I can't access because I'm on mobile and I don't think that I have the setup to edit text. So.
If somebody has also editing text possibilities, they can add. Also, their interpretations is fine. You don't have to kind of be documentary in this. Like, if you take an interpretation of Martin's move, you could make it. But I wanted to add one move which kind of continues the pathway from Linda's insects. That it is typical in this culture to install, maybe the installing is in quotation marks, paintings in places that gather insects. That is, it like a gallery is more like, if there is such a thing as gallery, it might have like soil underneath the paintings, but it's also like maybe even it's normal to put them in places of, say, nature, and even put attractors for particular kinds of insects, like a beehive next to it, not so much to it being part of the painting's installation, but more to introduce the bees to buzz about the painting, which is in itself a layer, but not the only way the layers are used.
Well, then maybe when what we see on the surface, on the face of this woman. Oh well, maybe this is a bit far-fetched. You see that she's missing almost like a piece of a face.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that is from previous damage. So there is a past life to this work. Maybe this work has been installed there for a long time. So we see some insects on it, but actually there were previous insects that have damaged the face of the figure. So that's actually, again, an accidental damage. It's not part of the wishes of the painter.
I make a branch of that the damage could also be intentional, that maybe there's instructions of how to damage it.
I'm now very curious about the weird aura, sort of like rings-like, and behind the head.
Mm-hmm.
Which may or may not be infinitesimally flat.
Yeah, and you see there is also like almost like a sparkle to it. So there is, they look to me almost like rings in moons and planets, because of that sort of sparkle that gives it sort of like a astronomical qualities.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
And make
just
one
spotting.
do say, because
yeah, it's a bit sideways of everything, but just kind of adding to the more the merrier. Like I'm just spotting in the top right of that image. It's what it's called a close this add insect. You see that? The top right.
close this add insect. All right.
Yes, it's a non-common species, but it can be found. And here is an occurrence.
I'll pose you a question, which is a move I add, but you know, like, is this insect particularly bred for art, or did it exist beforehand?
Oh, you mean that it's a close this art insect?
No, it's also like, was the insect like bred to precisely be that?
You know how you call them the insects that are in the wardrobe, right? I don't know how you call them, but maybe there are insects that are on artworks only.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shady biotope. Sorry, I'm trying to. You answer to ask your question. So the close this add insect, was it bred specifically for art? I don't think so. Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. I think that it does establish relationship with, wherever it roams for, more than passing moments of time, which can be consequential onto infrastructures and so forth. So if you push this insect, things will close and disappear.
I make a branching moves because I don't want to force this on your path, but it's like a path that branches from your path. Is that rather than closing, it's a sleep the painting pattern or insect, sorry, that it's a way to, like, after it has been activated, interacted with this insect, the painting goes to sleep, which is some kind of a different kind of existence. Like paintings are considered to have a sleeping and waking state. I don't know what that state is, but just to open that branch.
That's interesting. I think that the state of a sleeping painting would be that any discourse it could spawn, so to speak, would pause as well.
Which is interesting in itself. Like,
it's a kind of snooze this art insect.
I make a micro meta move and then another meta move, which is the micro meta move is just to point out and highlight how in this kind of play, how important the words that you don't know the meaning of completely are. Like pause, being able to say it moves the game, but the meaning of the pause is like an opening of play. And similarly to many of these things like sleep and so on. That's the micro. The other
I love that. Yeah.
Just the meta move to also kind of practicalize this, which is to describe a bit of the geme itself. Like imagine that somebody who makes gemes wants to start a new setting. Maybe it's for another game, maybe it's for just for the sake of existence, whatever the reason. And what they do is they create some space, undefined, where they set up few genes. Others come and play them and like record somehow they play. Maybe they write what they play generates. Maybe they record it in sound, whatever happens. Maybe they make new genes out of it. And through that, the kind of setting, whatever it is, grows. So I wanted to make this to point out how this can turn in one way, how this can turn to play culture. And in a way, like the genes are not like memes, like, oh, a cool meme, but it's like, oh, this is a growth point. This is more like a seed, and then growing it might create like something larger, like a setting, for example. Jakub, Jules, hopefully this is understandable, or also like understandable how it plays, and also maybe hopefully it also opens these possibilities, but also any comments. You don't have to make a move. Any comments are fine as well.
Yeah, I'm more in an auditory observer role because
no worries.
Yeah, but thank you. I'm being here.
Jules, any comments or whatever expressions?
Well, I was like listening to your discussion, and I felt like after 10 minutes or something, I just went out because it got too nerdy for me, for my background knowledge that I have on the topic that you're talking about with the picture. And yeah, but was still like nice to get into this topic, and yeah, I am looking forward to the next meeting.
What's the nerdy quality about it? How would you describe it?
Well, it's like, I guess you're engaged with art, like that you studied in academia in the field of art. So the style of conversation or like the style of exchange is like very different to the conversations I'm used to. So the aspects that you were focusing on and the little details you were focusing on, I just went out after some minutes and was like, okay, you do your stuff. I have nothing to contribute, but it's nice to listen.
But maybe because we started sort of like the first comments were theoretical, but for example about these moves, like for example, like adding the insect environments to the painting or visitors installing, was that also academic, or like the interest is also there, is like we like as a culture really this sort of how play comes to like general culture, not just stays in its lane, so to speak, and stays just in the game and it's played for fun. Like it kind of like that pathway has to be kind of digged out and made, and it's often kind of needs this sort of experimental forms. Like for example, in here it's like, can we generate a different culture of painting which has different conventions, and then that could have the further question of, can we then think of that as kind of feeding into painting? Of course the topic could be anything else, it happens to be here painting, but like it's an example topic. But are these moves understandable?
Yes, totally. Maybe it would have been also good to have the sentences at the start when we went into the topic, but like still it's totally fine, and it was totally I expected it that I will just like listen what you're engaging with and what you're discussing about, and it makes totally sense that I didn't came along all the way. And I'm also like, maybe I also walked out of the discussion because I'm like have a little like overdose of art students talking about paintings and art, and I guess this like touched something in my latest experiences that I had.
Yeah, I can understand that. Like in a way, like I think there is some frustration with the traditions of art with all of us in different ways. Like, but it's also like the one way is to reject it, but the other one is to take, let's say, reconfigure it or reconceive it, like because art is a culture. It has its own conventions.
Yes.
And for so like here, like picking the painting, but completely altering how a painting behaves is one way to, let's say, mutate what art could be. It's of course not the only way, but it's also like way to potentially challenge these conventions that are in art in itself, like but like I said, like it's like underneath it is also the sort of potential of play, which that what you get as an artwork is not a holy object, but it's actually your generation material. But how is it that? How it can be that? Which is then something where play can be helpful or a tool, instrument, which is kind of what this also contains as an idea, that if you can, you're not supposed to just look at it, but make moves upon it, and you're given instrument to make those moves, then you have moved from the space of, I like this work, doesn't even matter if you like it or not. You move to the space of, what do I do with it as material?
But I think I totally agree with the points that you were highlighting with the art and the culture, and like art as a medium as well, to express and play with conventions, cultures, and rules, and all of this. But I think I went out because I think that paintings itself are not the contemporary expression of culture. It's like academic, it's high society topics, but like you mentioned before, the meme culture, for example, like I think all these paintings, where do they go? They go to the museums, and just like very few group of people are somehow engaged with paintings. So it's very academic discussion.
But both paintings and memes are images. Like
Yes.
most of the people meet an image in the same form. But then like in the meme, like even though there is a wider culture, there's still this, I like this, I don't like this, because my job is to look at it, or my task, which is kind of old. Like in a way, like it makes certain things new, but then other things it doesn't make new. It actually kind of repeats the art like behavior that everybody becomes spectators of memes. They can make the memes, but then others become the spectators of them. So like then to kind of, I don't think it, for me at least, it doesn't matter if the starting point is painting, especially if you're to mutate the painting.
Yes,
because
especially
like
with the AI options that are coming up right now as well to create paintings or art or compositions.
Yes, or memes are among the options, but also there could be other options, like for example, if this, and now we're kind of playing with the rules, which is like what kind of rules you can use, and of course it could be any image, it could be any sound even, or any form. Like you could play this with a real life situation and make this similar moves. Then that's kind of asking like how we can use this cultural material in a different relation than a spectator, than somebody who is passively watching it, which is still like, it's not completely missing, but it's a very underpopulated area. And it's also like a key question of play is like, how can I play with this? Which is then like has to be approached. Like this is also like, maybe it was for you particularly wrong choice, but I kind of like picking the painting precisely to see the mutations, to pick something very traditional in order to mutate it, like, because like none of the directions that we're looking at, like insect growing, breeding insects, is not so much helping or working towards what is traditional painting, but even further, the way we are playing with it, the material, which is an image, is a very different way of being with an image than what the traditional is. And I think that's the key difference, is like it's finding ways to play with them precisely to transform the cultural sources into playable things.
I was thinking to say maybe two things. The first, do I say joules? Is that correct, or joules?
Jules
Joules, okay.
or Jule.
The first, Jule?
Jule is also okay, yes. That's for
Yeah, nice.
non-German or egal.
Exactly. So I as a kind of, so this is your first session on the call. So paintings don't play a large role as a point of focus in this group. Please correct me, guys, if I'm wrong, but I think this is like almost accidentally today that there is one. I mean, not accidentally, but it's not representative of our usual material for discussion. I think it's super interesting the way that you respond. I think it's really, really curious. I mean, for me, and I just wanted to, because I wanted to say one thing next, kind of picking up on where we just were while we were kind of playing the way. Maybe that could even make a bit sense. Maybe it doesn't. But I was just kind of, now that we came through the pause this ad / snooze this art insect to this idea that one could kind of pause the discourse in a kind of in a freeze state. I think that's, like, so to speak, organizationally speaking, a rather interesting proposition, because I think it suggests a kind of, well, dynamic would be precisely the wrong word, but the opposite of a dynamic, maybe like a static of a discourse that is not usually in the cards when we think about discourse. And so I'm not saying that we have that in any kind of realizable fashion because we just played that into existence, but we have it now as a possibility to kind of look at maybe what discourse is or isn't or could be or couldn't be. And so maybe through this kind of, maybe what you found were a bit nerdy loopings, I would feel that would be something that is, you know, coming out. And I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but like that was just where I was thinking what this would be heading or something.
Maybe one potentially concretizing addition, like taking from Martin's point, like this sort of, let's say, the snoozing or turning art to its stream mode, like as kind of like thinking that, like, making these moves on this image creates this material, and among the material there was this idea of putting art or images in general, maybe even other things than images, into dream state. I could now, for example, turn that into a role, and that role is somebody who puts images into dream states, on whatever form the images is. Like, I could come up with the fancier title, like I don't know, a visual dreamer, or visual. What's the mythical figure? The Sandman, visual sand person. And into that role, I would describe this move that they had this sort of objective of play of whenever they find an image or image-like thing that interests them, to find a mode for it where it dreams, and maybe do that practical. So maybe they find, like, they actually start playing maybe with just that description. Maybe there's more, maybe there's some practices that they do, whatever, in the role description to make it easier. But for the sake of quickness, I could just describe just with that objective how I would play it. So maybe I would start to try out, like, maybe there is a way of using veils, like putting veils on images, and then when somebody would come and ask why it's veiled, it's in a dream state, and then I would tell, well, you have to now imagine how that image dreams, which is then play for them. And then playing that role is suddenly a social existence, now carried by whoever plays it, which then becomes a different approach. So that's a pathway where material generated something like this idea of dreaming images. And then turning that into a role is a way to turn it back to socially playing, which is then altering, or at least whenever it's played, how images are seen. Once again, they could be something else. Like I could think about how to make a street to dream. And I don't have to follow that idea, but the main point is like I was able to arrive to that idea because we went outside. We went to something that is non-conventional. Like it's actually for humans, you kind of have to push them to think in unconventional manner, or at least this is my opinion, that human creativity is vastly overrated. Like you have to kind of give like this sort of, now you're free to like think like painting stream or images stream, of this kind of frameworks, which then allows them to also come back from this weird, unusual connections to real situations, for example. So that's just an example of like in a way like very experimental, very intentionally drafty playtest of like, can this material be generated? Then can that generation lead to a cultural impact, which for example that role could be. I'm not saying it's a great example, but it was just an example I like generate on the spur of the moment to point out this path of going out and coming back in to culture in a way. Hopefully that makes some sense. Like maybe like one thing to say on top of that is like it's one thing to generate or create like, okay, this is the game we're going to play. But it's also important, and it's especially important for game and play culture, to figure out what the hell are we doing? Like what like the figuring out what is this and how does it work and how could it work in ways that don't yet exist is probably the most likely pathway to end up somewhere else than repeating what's currently present in game culture. Just like in every other form of culture, that's usually the way that somebody kind of stops and goes beneath the, what is this behavior? Whether that was even forms of art like literature or painting, but also like any form of culture like organization, usually like the point where somebody says, stop, what is this behavior? Can it be used differently? And what is it really doing? Is a way then to think, well, it could behave in some other way, which we don't yet have.
Yeah, it sounds to me like doing research actually and building the foundation and having a like theoretical foundation somehow for what's the topic that will be played on. It also reminds me a lot to like one seminar I had in my economic studies, the ones of last year, which was on the ability of imagination and how the ability of imagination is something what must be built in order to like think in new structures. And they had like different approaches to like make people move again to be able to imagine new structures. So as you said, it's like certainly not a precondition of just being a person or a human being to have the ability for imagination, but it's something which needs impulses, I guess, through games, for example. And yeah, I'm still not convinced of the painting, I'm sorry. Like, your group is called Economic Space Agency, and in contrast to paintings, I'm very much convinced of space, for example, as means of art to give impulses and, I don't know, create parallel spaces and have them open and accessible. So I really like public space, for example, as a canvas for imagining games. But I don't like also the discussion of either or. So I don't want to be, I don't want to positionate myself against paintings.
Yeah, it's also like Martin said in a short comment earlier that is this medium agnostic, which is like
medium what?
Agnostic. So therefore not tied to, not linked to medium, which is kind of like many of the approaches. Like here, they're using an image is easy, also given internet and whatnot, like having an image as material is easier than space, because we're connected in this kind of sense. But like many game mechanics are medium agnostic, as is this one. Like we could have done it maybe with slightly different cues or ingredients at play on a real space. And this is also like something that is a quality in games that is often not so normal in usual culture, is like, you know, like games exist as only sound, only visuals, combinations of visual sound, only language, any combination. And there is a reason for that, is because they often exist not as a representation, but actually operations. And therefore they can use any representation. So maybe this is something to underline, is like nothing this here is against space or even not about space. It is about space. Like if we were in the same space and we played this similar structure against that space and started imagining something different from that space and then brought it back to change that space in itself, that could work. It's just like images here is easier. Oh, Linda, you say you're leaving. Do you want to say some last words? Sorry,
No worries at all. No, just yeah. Saying to Jules as well that I feel like it's it took me a while as well to get into this sort of just methodologies and mindset, and I've struggled as well to be as spontaneous as maybe I am now into the whole game playing and game scene, because it took me a while to grapple with just the way of soldiering around. But yeah, I hope to see you in the next sessions, and I'm sure, yeah.
And thanks for the good moves, Linda. I think it's good that we paused that to kind of talk this through this issue, but I thought like there could have been many continuations on the kind of ideas you brought in.
So much fun. Thank you. Good to see you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you soon.
But yeah, so like that's also like of course, like as an introduction, it's hard to like address every point and every possibility. Like in this case also, because we had this session on the geme as a topic, which is kind of like how to address this, that there is this meme culture, but it has this sort of traditional anchor in it. And could there be an alternate form, which is a social offering? Like if like that's kind of like one potential trajectory we've been thinking about it, whether we follow it or not, that's still an open question, but potentially yes, is like to make the geme as a social offering, as a kind of challenge to the meme culture to get out of spectatorship, and therefore start this communal possibility of creating expressions that are more ingredients for generation rather than things to look at and evaluate, which is memes also. So memes are very close to paintings in this sense, and this is kind of towards challenging, but not just saying that as a sentence, what people should do, but how do you give them like ways to play them? So this is kind of like what we are workshopping here, so to speak. But yeah, the ultimate form for this would potentially be a social offering. which of course has to work with images, partly because people have to have bridges to understand it. Like take it too far and then people don't understand it. Like my first example, geme, was like proof in the pudding, was like just an image with words on the side, which you had to place on the image, which is like so close to a meme, but then the relation is changed because the meme isn't ready. But that's in a way like just the first step in itself, maybe not interesting, but kind of proving this, that the interaction can be changed. And this is kind of going further on this direction, and then what to do with them. Like, I think the interesting is not just placing words, but it's more like, okay, if they're about generation, what kind of things they could generate. And then this comes to the gardens and how the gardens could re-enter the world and things like this.
Yeah, this last point gave me a lot of like associations, because like association is the thing, like if you want to play with people, you want to like make associations somehow on a cultural basis that they already share. And in this seminar on the power of imagination, they were making a big point about the imaginary of like of society, or like the power of images in society, and how it also shifted the power of like images with the time of Descartes, and when all the rationalization came in, and the neoclassic as well, they cut it out, the societal imaginary, and the
yeah,
they put it the images, and they were putting images from up.
Yeah, and agreed. And it's also like maybe what the current day in terms of the imaginary of society is. One of the things that we're the most limited in is structures, that is to reorganize society. Like we can make images or words or art, so to speak, into society. In like, of course, it has its own economic system, but we are fairly free in our own selves to make these expressions. But one of the things that is very, not completely locked out, but very limited in its kind of creative possibility is to say, what about this kind of organization? Like even it is an organization to say, I take this role of a person who puts images into dreaming state. That doesn't exist. And it's weird for people that the work would be that role. And of course, then because it's a game to play, then the work is also people playing that role, and then that leads to other results, changing images in itself. But we don't really society-wise have such approaches enough. Like in a way, like we can make artworks in a traditional sense about society, but how do we reorganize it, and how do we create spaces to reorganize it? And this is precisely why, or one of the reasons why, games are interesting, because they do organize people differently. They say, now rules are this, now the possibilities are this. So this is why it's opening the ground, but also how to express on that ground, and how to express it in a manner that it's not just like, okay, these 5 people are playing from 5 to 7 and then the game ends. But for example, creating such a role then is more like a virus. Like it goes to the world, and then it starts talking about what it's doing to an image, to another person, which then learns about it. And there's no like a bubble of 5 to 7 or whatever, a certain space. It can freely move in the society potentially.
Yeah, also in the university, they were having this like research project on this connection of knowledge and viruses. And they were like presenting the research, and I was very confused about this link of connecting knowledge or ideas with a biological idea of the spreading of a virus. Yeah, I like you also use this term right now. What do you connect a broader idea with this idea of the virus?
I was sort of quite literal with it. Like, let's put it concretely. Like I wish I had a better role, but the spur of the moment, I had this idea of person taking the objective that they are like in a way imaginary profession of like putting images to dream states. But because they take this objective, they start playing it and generate waves. Like, oh, I do it by putting whales on them, or I actually when people are looking at them, I come to their side and talk about their dreams, so that becomes the dreaming. They come up with different ways of playing that. Now, that is fairly concretely kind of viral in the sense of, well, how does a virus work? It's a singular vessel that moves in the world, but then it can infect another vessel, like it inserts its genetic code to another cell, which then produces viruses. And here it's kind of similar, like somebody plays that role and then some other person comes to see the image that they built this sort of dreaming on. Now that person is infected, potentially. I mean, they might not follow that, but they might take such role or bring other people to that person, and then this practice in itself would grow. So it's exactly like a virus in the sense that it has the power of infection and therefore multiplying itself.
I mean, in a sense, it's what's happening at this moment, right now, right?
Yeah,
between us. Whether we will, I think this is also funny because we will not be able to replicate it, but there's the chance for mutation, which is a certain survival strategy that viruses also need to exploit. Like,
yes, very much so.
By the way, I just want to, I wanted to say that, like, you said earlier, what you don't know about a word you say becomes a possibility for play for others. Remember that?
Yes.
I just need to emphasize and underline this because this is a very concrete and strong, I think, argument for the necessity of an excess of not knowing. That's a very straightforward, observable, where we can see how not knowing is like, you know, almost functionally a necessity. Just wanted to kind of put that into the thing here. And
yeah, it's actually a very concrete thing in games, and I will now scroll on my screen sharing. So, like,
by the way, hey, I need to say that, like, it's 7 o'clock. I need to go, basically.
Yeah, we'll be ending soon. I think this was a good conversation, even though it kind of like paused the playtest, but I think it was maybe useful to have this because I also made these questions because I was interested in what is the kind of distance with it. But I'll be short with this because this might interest you, Martin. So I was playing with the gene structure in different ways, and I actually have a lot of stuff, which is very, well, to me at least, very interesting. But I couldn't bring all of that into space. But one of the things I was playing was these are solo role-playing rules written by Sean Tompkin, who is an interesting character because he also wrote Iron Swan, which is a very currently famous solo role-playing game. And this is brand spanking new. I think it's like 2 weeks old, or it's actually not published yet, to be honest. Like, but it had this interesting system that is not too amazing, but I liked it, which was it was towards generation of location. I swear, Martin, this will connect to your point about the opening and the unknowing. But so it's a sort of play where you first generate a location for yourself, like this is a role playing. Your character moves in location in language sense. How you generate the location is you first throw a d4, and then you first row a d20, which is the bottom part of the screen, the area table. So let's say then you get an idle workshop, you threw a 10. So then you throw like how many details you have. It might be 1 or 4. And then you throw for each detail like contents, environment, you get an oddity or danger. Let's say we get an oddity. And then you go to this table, it's like now we have an idle workshop and it will have one oddity, which might be shifting architecture. And let's say we get something else, we get contents, there is moldering tapestries. So now it's an idle workshop with shifting architecture and moldering tapestries, and maybe there is flooded space. So suddenly the floor is flooding with water. So like it's a very simple system, but I think it was good in the sense that whatever it's giving is ingredients, in the sense of you don't know how the space is flooded. You get flooded space. But it's precisely for you to not given us like, oh, I don't know, but in a form like I have to make it. So for the idle workshop with the flooded space, I made the floor to be kind of running in somewhat stagnant water. And that was my way of using the unknowing as a creative act, which these kind of things, like especially solo role playing, is full of, because it has to use these kind of elements. And it's a very interesting ground in itself, because it's trying to figure out things that are rather unusual even for play. But this is a great example. Like everything here is not giving you the thing. It's like an idle workshop, but that's not much. But then you have a system to add to there, like a flooded space, but even that's not enough. You're constantly dealing with like simply suggestions that are unknown, but they are also ingredients for you to build the space. And the whole game continues in that kind of direction. And this is, I would still underline, like, it's not that this invented this kind of approaches. This is more like now solo role-playing normal, but it's a new normal, let's say. It's a culture that is rather interesting, and it's interesting in this how it's practically using the unknown, practically expressing something that is not ready, that is more like a seed rather than a final thing. So that's my practical example towards this topic you raised, Martin.
Yeah, very interesting. I like it.
And very simple, but yeah, more on this kind
and
of.
I think, sorry, like we're finishing, and I really need to go
Yeah.
also. But like, it's not just the unknowing; it's the mix between the known, kind of the stimulus, and the unknown. You have to, like, I mean, the thing that creates that kind of buzz in a way is that there is a kind of partial known.
Yes.
Because without that, it would also be rather couch potato style.
Yeah, and in this sense, it's a seed. Like seed is not nothing. Seed has in it like a way of growing, just like this kind of word, but then it's not ready. Like it has to be grown. So it's giving you partial in the form of growth. So that's the direction. But like in a way, like these words and the ones we're using in the geme example have a very similar behavior. Like although these were maybe slightly more exotic, like every surface is layered, or there's jewelry for paintings, but these are not ready. Like they function similarly as these. But then the key thing is give the system of play with that you have like way of growing the seeds or growing from the seed. But yes.
To propose to maybe close the session for today, because I'm also hungry and not concentrated anymore.
Yeah, we're
so
closing.
We can take the time to have some last words.
Yes. Yeah, and if you want to have also last words, you can say I can wrap quite quickly after that. But anybody else want some last words?
Yeah, I would like to share with you that I really enjoyed this meeting today, and I yeah, have a lot of like head fireworks after like getting into the topics with you, and I will love to continue joining the meetings and like get into all this like little pattern of knowledge that I got today. And also for you, Martin, I would really be up for another meeting on your game and performance thing. So yeah, let us know if there's something happening.
Yeah, let's put it in the public main group, like definitely that you can also know about it. I had one practical thing. So just the one check on that the group is actually XORG, which is sort of an, let's say, a sovereign satellite from Economic Space Agency, which is about the sort of play structures in itself. Like there's a larger network called Economic Space Agency, and this is like our own independent branch. But the XORG stands for Experimental Organization. So that's the thematic here in these meetings, is this sort of precisely crossbreeding between game and organization, how play and social come to, like that as a framing. And then finally, I think actually some of the directions where the geme was going were very promising in this, like proof in the pudding that the generation can create unconventional structures, and then those can be harvested, like repurposed. Of course, it would need more play, but I mean, the play was super simple and short, so that's good that it can create something so fast. I think there are many, many ways to not just make them, but also to play them. And this was merely like a simple way of playing them. And that's something to develop. And I think it needs that simple way to have a kind of social offering, social proposal in it, but like it's also maybe useful to look at these other ways of playing, which this material on the screen is, by the way, somewhat of a future possibility too. But that's it from my side, and that's my closure. And with that, I will say, first of all, goodbye to the potential people by stopping the recording. So you can make your own goodbyes.